Hello, lovely mamas, and welcome back to another episode on the Beanstalk Mums Podcast. Today, we're doing things slightly differently for the first time, going with a video as well as an audio file. So for those listening to this on the podcast platform, check it out on the YouTube channel that is now up and running and live. But besides that exciting fact, we are celebrating freedom. Freedom from uncertainty and from fear, and freedom to create a life that you truly deserve. And joining me is the wonderful Ella Hickman, founder of Hickman Family Lawyers. Not just an experienced family lawyer, she's a dedicated advocate whose passion lies in empowering women and families throughout life's challenging transformations. And with her compassionate yet pragmatic approach, Ella has supported countless mums. Today we dive deep into practical and heartfelt discussions about how you can regain control, protect your emotions and legal well-being, and find that freedom at the end of the day, even in the toughest times. So whether you're preparing for separation, navigating tricky parenting arrangements, or struggling to enforce court orders, Ella's wisdom and insights are here to guide you towards strength, hope and brighter days ahead. Ella, it's lovely to have you here with us.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm really happy to be here.
Thank you. We do appreciate this time. Can you maybe kick this interview off with sharing a little bit about your journey into family law and what's driven your passion for supporting women through challenging family situations?
I think for me, when I started working in law, I was working in a commercial firm and I found that very boring, to be honest. And for me, it was about something that impacts most families that we know. You can think of, I'm sure, multiple people who are impacted by separation and divorce, and being able to assist them through what can be probably the worst time in your life. So when you're talking about separation, you're talking about your children, you're talking about your financial security, you're talking about your home, and you're talking about your relationship. And I always say, apart from your health and being unwell or your family being unwell, I think those are probably the things that are most important to people. And so for me, it's about helping people through that really difficult part of their life and helping them to see there's a better life beyond that. It's just about battling through the storm at this point and getting out the other side.
It certainly is a very trying time, and often, one we don't plan to get into. It does eventuate as time goes on, and certainly not something we hope to achieve, but by getting into a relationship.
But it is, it's one of those things that's, more and more prevalent, and we have to deal with it. And I'm all about dealing with it in a really commercial and practical way, because I think that the emotional side is absolutely there. And of course, I'm aware of that. But there are so many other great resources that people can access for that. I think there's a real power in taking control of the practicalities and the legal side of things, because that people want to know, how am I going to live? How am I going to pay for things? How are my kids going to, keep going to the same school? All of these things that are going to, how am I going to make sure my kids are safe? That's obviously a massive one. These are all things which are incredibly difficult for people. So the emotional side, it cannot be separated from that. But obviously we've got that really practical and legal side too that needs to be kind of fought through as well.
And it's lovely that you're able to maintain that for your clients, because that's exactly right. The emotional aspect of that separation really clouds your judgment at that time of the event, and you're not able to separate those things, and you almost do need that other person to be able to step in and say, understand that right now you are in this massive turmoil and you cannot see the woods for the trees, but these are the practical steps.
I think as well, not just these are the practical steps, but these are the things you do need to worry about now, and these are the things you don't need to worry about now. So I get a lot of clients, a lot of women coming to me, and they're panicking and they're saying, I'm separated, I'm getting divorced, I need to get a divorce, I need to do a property settlement, I need to deal with my kids, I need to deal with child support. And there's some of those things I can say, okay, take a minute. You don't need to deal with all of those things right now. These are the things we need to deal with urgently. Have you got somewhere to live? Have you got money to live off? What are the arrangements going to be for your children immediately? All of those types of things. And there's some things we can say, let's just take a load off your mind for now and put it down the road, because that's not something that you need to clutter your mental space with at the moment or use your energy on.
Absolutely. And I suppose this really plays into that freedom aspect of the topic that we've got throughout this month in Beanstalk Mums, and having that unpacking of what's going on and having that freedom in being able to focus your attention and efforts on that most important part. And we sometimes talk about how freedom is being able to live life without fear. And obviously, these mums would be in a high level of fear for the unknown, for their children, for their safety, or potentially unnecessary constraints on how this situation now places on them. So, in your experience, how can legal clarity, and I think you've already touched on that a little bit, help single mums feel truly free at the point of separation and after separation as well?
So I think there's, as I said, there's always the emotional stuff, and you're probably in some respects going to deal with that, or deal with, particularly if there are children involved. Like if you need to do a property settlement and there's no kids, then there's going to be an end date on that, right? You're going to be able to get to a point where you go, okay, we are completely separated and we have no further connection with each other.
Yes.
Obviously, the difficulty with having children is that you're going to kind of be tied to this person in some way, probably in most cases forever, at least until your children are 18. So I think it's really important to have something in place that everyone is operating from, so you're all singing from the same song sheet, if you like, about what the arrangements are, particularly for your kids. So I'm a big believer, let's get to mediation quickly, let's have a parenting plan, let's have some family court consent orders or something along those lines to regulate those arrangements so that there's no uncertainty about it. So a really good example is Christmas time. It's a really tough time, particularly for families when there's just been a separation. Who's going to have the kids? The traditions that you used to have, you might not be able to have in the same way anymore. There's lots of things that are changing there. So I think having a conversation or having something in place around that, so when it gets to Christmas Day and you can't contact your lawyer or whatever it might be, you've got something in place so that you and your ex know, okay, at 2:00 we're having a handover for Christmas Day. The kids are going to spend the morning with me. They're going to spend the afternoon with him, because those times can be really emotional and really emotionally driven or charged occasions. So I think if you can have something in place that settles that, it just gives you that certainty and it takes that unknown out of things.
Yes.
It's the same with your property settlement as well. I think that's another really important thing for particularly for single mums, if you're not in the workforce, or if you are reliant on your ex or your husband for financial support, which is the case for a lot of people, particularly with young kids. It's often the case that someone's home from work with the kids and the other person is working and providing the financial support. I think it's about knowing I have options here to make sure that I'm not going to lose my home, not be able to buy groceries, not be able to pay daycare fees, all of these types of things to help you adjust and move on to that next chapter.
So what I'm hearing there is that the legal clarity is setting guidelines, basically creating a structure within which this now separated relationship will work.
Absolutely. And I think it's, well, if you think about that time when you're separating, and I'm a single mum as well, there are so many things changing for you and your children, like so many things at that time. And if I can give someone the reassurance that's not going to change right now, if it does, this is the way it's going to look. Yes. That is so important and so valuable for people, because at a time when emotionally you are just completely all over the shop, and you're also not just dealing with your emotions, but trying to carry your little people through this time as well, when they have so many questions and you might not know how to answer them, then that's really, I think that to me is where I see people come to my office and they are just broken and they don't know where to start. And by the time they leave, they're saying, Ella, thank you so much. Like, I feel so much better. Even though I'm not always delivering the best news, it's not about trying to make people feel happy or anything. It's about saying, this is what is likely to happen in your case, and this is the way you're going to achieve that, so that then they know, they have that clarity around what things are going to look like.
It sounds like you're basically returning that control of the situation back into their hands.
Yes.
And therefore that freedom, because like you said, in that space of emotional turmoil, you feel, and you're in a situation that you've never been in before, you're in an uncharted space, you feel completely out of control. So by having these little structures put in, you're basically handing control back to the mums, so that like you said, whether the news is good or bad, they've got that ability to then go forward.
Yeah, 100%. I think that's something, like, I've been doing this job a long time now, and I think that's the thing that I see the most is people just wanting some clarity and some certainty around things. And I can't make promises. I can't, say this is definitely going to happen, but I think it's more about the pathway, because the other example I'll give is I get a lot of people coming to me who haven't yet separated and they're just deciding what to do. And I think as well, I take the view that forewarned is forearmed. So
Yes.
if you have a little bit of understanding about what it might look like, it helps kind of navigate things a bit better as you're moving through it. And I think there's real power in that, and there's some real control in that.
So if I was one of those thinking about separating and I came to you, what would be some of the suggestions you would give me?
So the first thing I would always check in with is your physical and your emotional safety. So I see a lot of women, as you can expect, who are dealing with situations regarding family violence. That might not just be in a physical sense, that might be in a financial sense, in an emotional sense. There's a lot that goes into that. The definition of family violence is really broad in Australia now. So what I do, that's, I think, absolutely critical, because if someone's not physically and emotionally safe, obviously a huge problem. Doesn't matter all of the rest of the stuff they might need to get out of that situation. It's about linking them in with services, or making sure they know that they have somewhere to go, that they, whether it be family or some sort of, a refuge, something like that, to make sure that they are going to be safe. Then the legal mechanism behind that might be something like a restraining order, and of course not every matter needs a restraining order. And, I'm very careful about advising people when they do need a restraining order, because you would never want to use one improperly. But absolutely, that's an avenue open to people to access in terms of protecting them, and again, giving them some breathing space if they have those concerns for their safety. So that would be the first kind of legal step I would encourage people to take. The second thing is kind of a discussion around, and in no particular order, financial and parenting, because I think that both of those things are really important early on.
I suppose one impacts the other very much as well, doesn't it?
They do. And I don't think you can talk about, and it would be so rare. I get a lot of clients who come in and say, I need to talk about one particular thing. And it's very rarely the case that people need to talk about one particular thing. More often than not, it's like, no, actually, there's a lot that goes into this. And I'm going to talk you through all of them. Don't worry. We're going to get through all of those things, so you know that these are the things that you need to deal with. But from a parenting perspective, it might be some advice on, well, what might the care arrangements look like at this stage? While you guys are going through a transition, are you still living under one roof, for example? And what might the care arrangements look there? Are you going to move out? Are you going to move further away? Is the other person going to live further away? In WA, we have a lot of people who are working on FIFO rosters. So that's fly in, fly out roster. So is the other parent away for long periods of time? What does that look like? What might the care arrangements look like? I had a client once he was a male client, and he said he wanted a 50-50 care arrangement, but he was away 3 weeks at a time and then back for 1. And I said, well, how is that ever going to work? So sometimes reality testing these ideas as well, giving people, because a lot of people come to me and they just assume, it has to be a 50-50 shared care arrangement. That's not always the way it works, and that's not always what the law tells us is best for kids. So saying, well, that might be a good goal to get to for both of you, but that might not be realistic or best for your children at the moment. So what might it look like now to make sure mum and dad are both spending time with your kids, but making sure the kids are also stable and navigating this time also through, while mum and dad are trying to get through some pretty complex emotions. So giving some information about that, I think, is really important.
And I'm glad that you've touched upon children. Of course, children are pivotal to us mums.
Of course.
And, that freedom of feeling confident that you have everything back in your grasp, that control is very much dependent on how we are positioned in the capacity to care for those children. And so what sort of key considerations should mums have when negotiating parenting arrangements, besides the logistics of potentially being away for 3 weeks and whatnot?
So we've had a recent change to the legislation around care arrangements for children. The emphasis now is not just the safety and well-being of the children. Now there's also a real emphasis on the safety and well-being of someone who's caring or has caring responsibility for the children. And I think that's so important for mums, because if mum's not coping, then the kids are, and I say that, in terms of what we're talking about here, which is single mums and giving that advice. If mum's not coping and she's got primary care of the kids are not going to cope. So it's about looking after both in that space. So the first thing would be looking at safety of the children, safety of the parents. So making sure that there are no risk issues. The most common risk issues we see: drug and alcohol use to excess, serious mental health issues, which might impact someone's ability to parent, family violence. Of course, I don't see many cases these days which don't have some element of family violence in them on either side, which is really sad. But I think the stats in the family court would agree with that's the majority of what they've got coming through there is allegations of family violence. So working out what can we do there to make sure people aren't at risk, and particularly the children aren't at risk. What sort of things might you need to ask for from the other person? A great example would be if there's allegations of drug use, maybe you want them to do some drug and alcohol counselling. Maybe rehabilitation is appropriate. Maybe they say they're not using and you want them to do a hair strand test to check whether that's actually true. Because if it's not, then, there's some problems there. Someone who's perhaps using methamphetamine, not necessarily going to be a good and safe parent at that time until they sort those issues out. So these are things that we need to look at early on, the safety. Then obviously we need to turn our mind to things like practical considerations, like needing to spend time with both parents, making sure that the kids are keeping that connection and that relationship with both mum and dad in the safest way possible, even though it doesn't look the way it used to with everyone living in one place anymore.
Sure. I'm listening to the different factors that you're listing there. How do you circumnavigate, or how do you advise mums that potentially deal with difficult ex-partners or partners that don't align with the court orders, or take those factors that you've just listed into considerations? They feel that it should be 50-50 regardless of any other issues.
Yeah, well, people rarely come to see me when things are amazing.
Yes.
But in terms of difficult ex-partners, difficult is what we do, unfortunately. But part of the reason I actually changed the legislation was because there was this, I'm going to call it confusion for people. And I think it impacted a lot of dads in particular about the understanding of what should happen after a separation, presumption or this assumption that they should get 50-50. They've actually changed the wording of the legislation to get rid of that sort of, I'm going to call it a presumption, in terms of equal shared parental responsibility and flowing from that equal care, because they found that it was causing a lot of confusion within the court system and a lot of ambiguity for people about what should happen, and then coming in with an expectation that 50-50 is where it should be, and that then not being appropriate or not being the case for a lot of other reasons. So the first thing I would say is sometimes it's about managing the other person's expectation. And I am a big fan of people going to get legal advice. If someone comes to see me, I say, has your ex seen a lawyer? And they say, no, I don't think so. And I'm like, well, if you have any sway over them whatsoever, I would encourage them to get some advice, because sometimes it's about someone reality checking them and testing their ideas and saying, for example, well, you live out of Perth 3 weeks in a row. How are you going to have 50-50 when you're only back 1 week a month? So, for example, to go back to the example I used, reality testing those ideas. I think then it's about the way you're going to formalize your agreement. And for some people, a parenting plan is more than sufficient. And that's just sort of some guidelines and a reflection of the agreement between the two of you. Not necessarily legally binding in the sense of the court can't enforce it, but really useful tool in terms of recording, this is what we've agreed, this is what our arrangement is, and we're going to follow these guidelines. But in some cases, in many cases, you might need some court orders, which then, if people are not complying, you have the ability to go back to the family court and say, this person is not doing what they're supposed to be doing. I need the court's help to enforce that. And the court's help might be they're making someone do something. It might be suspending the time until something is done. It might be ordering them to go and do a parenting course or some counselling or some drug testing, as I said before, or getting some treatment at some sort of facility. So the family court has the power there to enforce the orders, if you like, and enforce the arrangement between the parties to make sure that there is some continuity there and that people are doing what they're supposed to do under the agreement or under the orders. That's probably the most useful thing. And the thing I would see really often is people coming in and saying, we've got these orders, but they're not doing the right thing. And that might be with kids, with parenting, or with financial as well. Or they're not paying me what they should be paying me. They're still living in the house and the orders say they should get out. These things as well that the court has the ability to deal with also.
Do you get a lot of people coming back with breaches to the court, to the parental court orders?
I'd say a lot. That's not mainly what I do. I mainly would deal with people who are kind of either at the start or navigating through the process, because the process is really long. So I did a trial maybe 2 weeks ago or 3 weeks ago, and that matter had been on foot for, I think, 5 to 6 years.
Yeah.
So I always joke that at the time it started, I wasn't even pregnant. By the time it ended, I had 2 kids. So that's that's how long the process can take. So definitely not my recommendation to go down that process, but definitely had to. In lots of cases, you have to.
Yes.
But yeah, look, I do get people coming back. Often, even when I haven't done the orders, do you know what I see a lot is people who negotiate their own orders and have maybe left a little bit too much room in there or some ambiguity in there, and then them coming to me and saying, hey, look, these are what we negotiated. They're not doing X, Y, Z. Because a lawyer, we're very pessimistic. We see the worst of the worst. We see how things can go wrong. So when we're drafting agreements, we're looking at the way it could go wrong, or looking at something that might happen, or if the wheels fall off and these people can't agree with that, then what's the fallback position? And I see a lot of people coming with these orders that say, in accordance with an agreement. And then someone gets a new partner, someone, identifies a risk issue, there's something else that comes up. The wheels fall off, people aren't getting along anymore, and then that's when you'll have problems with those quite fluid or quite relaxed types of agreements in terms of not having enough structure around them. So my preference is put a lot of structure in the agreement. There's always scope for you to agree outside of that and to come to your own agreements if you're both happy with that and that's working. But I think it's better to have a fallback position that is a little bit more solid and a little bit sort of more fleshed out than something that's more general.
Yeah, it was just sort of a bit more of a personal wandering, because there's a lot of sort of, when you do separate, not all separations occur in a negative state, as a lot of people are still quite amicable at that early stage, and like you've mentioned, will have some sort of structure, or may not have, may have gone through the courts and have just had not an agreement that's been put together well. And then, because a lot of the mums I deal with, they sort of feel, well, I've got this piece of paper, we're supposed to be doing X, Y, and Z, but we're not. And then because he doesn't adhere to this, they feel like they're stuck, because it means going back to court. And so I know that you don't normally generally deal with that side, but would that also be just as an elongated process as going through the initial?
No, if you've got final orders, the enforcement process is much quicker. So you're not going to spend the 5-6 years, and hopefully not, that other people might. And I do deal with it. It's probably just not the main part of it, because in my experience, when you do have orders, most people are pretty good at following them. Like people, that's a really common fear that people say to me, what if they don't follow the orders? What if he's not doing what he's supposed to be doing? I say, look, the court's not always in the habit of making orders in anticipation that people are going to do the wrong thing. The court's expectation is we've made these orders, people should follow them. And in my experience, for the most part, people do, unless you're getting along pretty well and then you agree to deviate from them. So I see a lot of that, and that's fine. No problems with that. If that's working for you guys and working for your kids, absolutely do that. Like, I think that's, if you can get to the stage where you, with your ex-partner, where you can have those types of communications and work out things a bit more casually, that's like gold standard and what we're kind of all aiming for.
Absolutely. Dream come true.
Yes, of course. But obviously that's not always the case. And you do have those times where people come back and say they're not doing it. It's incredibly frustrating when you have something that people should be following and they're just not. And that's when I would say, you might want to access an enforcement process. I'm a big believer in mediation, not in a let's sit around and hold hands and kind of sing Kumbaya way. I think a lot of people have the wrong idea of what mediation is. For me, it's actually a really commercial process and a really practically driven process where we can sit down and talk about what's not working, why isn't it working? Because sometimes it's about we don't communicate well.
No.
Let's have a conversation about why this transition is really hard for the kids. Well, I've noticed the day they come back from your house, they're really upset, and this is the reason. I think it's because they're really missing you. What about we look at trying to do a handover from school? Because then they've got school as a buffer in the middle of the day.
Yeah.
They don't, have that bit where they come home to mum and then have to go to dad, or come home to dad and have to come back to mum. They don't have that disruption. Let's try and do that. And it's about problem solving and workshopping what the problem is and coming up with some solutions. Most of what I see with parenting stuff is poor communication. And I think a lot of cases, I say this a lot, falls into one of two categories. So you have cases where one or both parents there are risk issues. So things that need to be dealt with. And I think there absolutely the court needs to be, or often has to be, involved in those ones to manage those risk issues. Like I said before, family violence, drugs and alcohol, serious mental health issues. They need to be kind of managed a little bit differently. And then I see a lot of cases where we've got two good parents and they just can't communicate and can't get along for a lot of reasons. And that's not because one person might be a bit of an idiot or a bit of a dickhead or something. Do you know what I mean? I don't know if I'm allowed to say that, but
But it's true.
I just think that like that's a different type of conflict to manage. And that's I think that's tougher in a way, because when you look at this person's on drugs, there are solutions there. There's rehab, there's drug testing, there's things you can do to check that. One person just being like innately difficult and having a real axe to grind with the other person, thinking, well, you left me and I'm going to get back at you and stuff like that. Like, that's a huge problem. And you know what? Who's the biggest loser in that is the kids, because they're going to absolutely get. When I started working in family law a long time ago, I thought it was just a cliche that people say that kids get caught in the middle. I thought, I don't think people would really do that. And I can tell you,
I don't think they do it on purpose, though. Yes, they do that. But
some people I'd say do, but I think for the most part, people never intend to go out and hurt their children. I don't think that's really ever the goal. I think it's just a really, really sad and unfortunate byproduct of conflict between separated parents.
I think you've just hit the nail right on the head there in regards to 80% of separations. And that is the fact that it's just two different, there might be wonderful parents to the child. But you get them in the same room and World War III will break out with nuclear bombs. And it may be over something so simple as, I'm really downplaying it. But
I'll give you an example. You didn't send the soccer uniform. You were supposed to do that. And then it spirals into this thing like uniforms, school uniforms, extracurricular. You have no idea how much of my job is dealing with things like that. And it sounds so silly, but it's not silly for people, because like if you're the one whose kids are coming home and once again, the uniform hasn't been returned and you've got to get them there, these things aren't just cheap to go and buy. Like, it's really annoying. It's really frustrating.
It layers and layers and layers, and you start to think, well, that's clearly not being respectful towards me, potentially. I mean, I don't want to internalize this at all.
No.
But it just adds up, doesn't it? And then I like how you said earlier about having these, not ironclad, because I suppose you can't have anything that's ironclad in this world, but going through the benefits of going through with a lawyer or someone on that extra person that's not emotionally involved is, almost someone that plays that devil's advocate and comes up with all these potential ways something can go wrong, so that you can have as many caveats, I suppose they're called, in the plan.
I think that's really important. But also, like, I see my role is not just for someone to come in and say, I want this, this, and this, and me to say, okay, off we go, let's go and get that for you. Sometimes that's totally reasonable what they want to say. Yeah, let's go and get that. That's more than reasonable. Sometimes it's me saying as well, look, that's unlikely to happen. I think this is far more likely. We can try and stagger the approach to give you a little bit more time to adjust to that, or to give the kids more time to adjust to that. But I see what you want long term as being a bit unrealistic, and I think this is more realistic. Let's try and work towards that, kind of taking a detour past what you want on the way to getting what's probably likely to happen at the end of the day. So it's about saying, I think this is where it's going to sit at the end of the day, and let's be realistic about the way we negotiate, because I'll be the first one to say, lawyers are so expensive. Most people cannot afford to have a lawyer doing all their running around for them and communicating with the other party and stuff. Like, it's really unrealistic long term, and there's 100% a place for it, and I would not be as busy as I am without there being a place for that. But I think it's really something that the goal is to try and get to like a realistic and a workable arrangement that's probably largely in line with what the court would do anyway, because if you know what the court's going to do, then it's a pretty good measure of where you should be heading with your agreements and with your communications.
That's great advice, absolutely great advice. And I suppose all the mums that are single and that have gone through this process listening, they know how expensive that court system is.
I say to clients all the time, I always say, I am the person who stands to make the most out of you going and having a big fight down in the family court. And if I'm telling you to avoid it like the plague, please know how bad it is down there. Like, you do not want to be there, because That's just not like, honestly, it will, if you have a hope of being good co-parents together, the family court is not the place to fix that. And no disrespect, like the magistrates and the judges and the registrars down there are doing amazing work and doing what they need to do and applying the law and everything. But like they are fighting an uphill battle in terms of just the number of cases coming through and the time frames and the resources that they have. So if you don't want to give up, 4, 5, 6 years of your life down there fighting it out, and keep in mind, if your kids are 6 when you enter that system, they're 12 years old when you leave, and that is a really big difference and a really long period in your child's life.
Absolutely.
Where you have been engaged in that kind of conflict, which I don't think is good for anyone. I don't think it is helpful to anyone.
So would you say that the mistakes that mums make are potentially having those unrealistic expectations and wanting things to go one way and sort of pushing to get their way and staying in a divorce system for longer?
I think it's, and I'm not saying they're wrong to have those unrealistic expectations. Sometimes it just comes from a place of just not having the knowledge and not having the information. But I think a lot of people go through a separation, your friends and your family are around you saying, well, this happened to me and I did this and, blah, 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 blah. And you can I got $1 million when I separated and all the rest of it and stuff. And sometimes it's that misinformation, which is just not relevant to your situation, which is a little bit unhelpful. And then people come and then it's up to me or up to one of my colleagues to break down that misinformation and go, okay, this is not going to apply to your situation because you guys don't have $1 million to divide, for example. So that's not going to happen. So let's look at what you do have and let's be realistic around that. So I think, in some ways that is a hurdle for people to get over, is they think this is what I'm going to get. And then they come and are maybe told something different. A really big one is keeping your house. In WA at the moment, the property market has just gone crazy since COVID. So a house a few years ago, someone might have been able to afford to keep. Now the values have gone right up and it's gotten more and more expensive for people to be able to hold on to property and pay the other person out or refinance a mortgage or whatever the case might be. And that's really tough because people think that's their stability. And this is not a criticism of anyone. Like, I get it. Like, you want your stability. That's so critically important for your sense of well-being and where you are and your kid's home and it's near the school and it's near the extracurriculars and you've got friends in the street and all of these things. But sometimes
like clinging on that last little bit of normality, I suppose. But yes.
And that's just not realistic sometimes. And that's a really tough discussion to have with people when they come in thinking they're going to be able to hold on to it. And without, unfortunately, sometimes a lot of family support or whatever, you just might not be able to. And that's a really, understandably, really difficult thing for people to get their head around. So trying to deal with them coming in with that expectation can be tough.
I know at the beginning you've mentioned that you deal predominantly with, the practicalities and now we're sort of also uncovering, it's quite known that throughout the whole process there is that emotional and traumatic side of things. Do you work with anyone else or do you normally recommend someone that they will go, any support networks that the mums can access, or how do you?
I think everyone who's going through a separation should speak to a psychologist or a counsellor. Like, I think that's incredibly important because, as I said at the start, I can deal with the legal side of things, but I'm not qualified or trained to give you advice on the other stuff, on the emotional side of things. Like, I just can't. So I think it's so important to have a good support network. So hopefully that's some family and friends around you who know what you're going through and can help you. Then I think it's really important, to have that external support, like a good GP, a good psychologist, a good counsellor, someone who can help you navigate this really tough time. Lots of other people that might be relevant. So sometimes there might be a referral to a wills and estates practitioner who can do your will and make sure you're up to date with those sorts of things. It might be a good accountant because there might be some tax issues that need to be resolved, or you might need some advice around that. It might be a financial planner in terms of, okay, well, this is what you're likely to get. What's the best way for you to manage that money? All of these things which I'm not allowed to give advice on. So it's about linking people in with other services that are going to be important and necessary to help them with what they're going through. Because the legal part is just one part of it. And in the scheme of things, often the legal part is like not that long a period. Like, often my role, like, you sort of come in fiddle around with what I'm doing and then I'm gone, and I hopefully am gone forever. Like I say to clients all the time, I really hope I never see you again, like in the nicest possible way, because
Yeah.
usually means things are going well. But some of these other people, they might be like an ongoing fixture in your life for a really long period of time, like your support network, like some, sort of mental health support, like an accountant who you might need every year. So yeah, definitely about linking people up with other people.
Absolutely, good point there. It's not just the mental health support, but the accountants, the financial advisors, all the
Yeah.
other disciplines that we really don't even think about when we enter this stage of our life. Just as that X is going to be there for quite some time and we have to deal with them, we have to also have other support networks in place to continue on from the work that they do with you, for example.
And it's only going to help you, I think, in trying to get to a better co-parenting relationship and deal with what you've gone through, because people come out of relationships in really traumatic circumstances a lot of the time. And that's something that, like, we need to be gentle with ourselves and make sure that we are engaging with the right people who can help us through that. Because again, a lawyer is not always the best person to help you with that. And like I can say, as I said, I'm pretty like direct, like, no, this is what we're going to do. We're going to get down to this, and these are all the things we need to put in place. But I have clients, sometimes they'll call me and I think they just want to talk and vent. And I'm like, oh, this is a real waste of your money, because I don't know what I'm talking about with that. So I think you need to go and speak to someone else who can help you there.
Like, I like you, I like working with you, but...
Oh, 100%. No, yeah, like happy to keep working with you as your lawyer, but just I can't also be your counselor because I have no idea what I'm doing.
It's just that I think it's that part of vulnerability, because I remember when I went through my divorce process, you get so vulnerable with them, and you put your whole life, your finances, your parenting, the whole relationship is laid out in front. So then you kind of feel like you really know this person and you're connected with them, because on some level, you did. It's not a friendship, it is a relationship of sort.
Yeah.
So then it's easy just to fall into, well, they know everything, I'll just call them and just
Call them. And they do. And I don't want to sound like I'm like a monster or heartless or anything, but it's just that sometimes it's like, no, there's people that are just better at dealing with that than me. But look, I've got lots of clients who, in the time that they've been my client, they've had new babies, and you are there for these really significant parts of people's lives while they're also going through a pretty terrible part of their life as well. So I think that that's really important to remember as well, that we do have these long relationships with people. And of course, there's going to be something more than just like a professional relationship sometimes, because you do feel sorry for them, or you really empathetic towards them, or you really like them. Like I've lots of clients where I just really like and want the best for all my clients.
I was just wondering whether in that there's a lot of emotional doom and gloom and heaviness to it. But do you have any anonymous, of course, examples or clients that spring to mind that emerged stronger and more empowered after navigating that family court proceeding?
Yeah, look, a lot. I think it depends on the outcome sometimes. I think for me, the ones that come to mind are the people where you go to a mediation. I think there's a lot of power in being in control of the outcome there. And at a mediation, you and the other party are in control. No one's making a decision for you. No one's saying this, you must do this, you must do that. People who contact me the next day and say, maybe if I'd gone to court, I could have got a little bit extra, but number one, I would have spent more in legal fees than it was worth, for example. But I'm thinking, oh my God, Ella, it's done. Like I just woke up this morning and I felt so much better. It's just done. I've made my peace with this. Now I can move on to that next chapter. And for me, that's why I'm such a big believer in mediation. Like I work with some excellent mediators who are just phenomenal, and they work really hard to get an agreement. The lawyers are there working really hard to get an agreement to try and help these people move on. Because again, if I can help you avoid the family court process, like I feel like I've done my job better than I ever could, representing you and standing up and fighting, as people say all the time, in court. I think it's so much better if you can be involved and in control of that process. So I think that's where I see the people coming out most empowered.
I love how you bring that mediation. You've mentioned it earlier as well. And I think it's important to point out, because I think a lot of people, when they go into mediation, they think, well, if I go to mediation, this mediator will be able to get my ex to come around to my way of thinking, and I can still have my way, which is not quite how mediation works.
No, it's not. And often I say to people, happiness is not a realistic outcome out of this process. It's not going to be happy, because if you both come away feeling slightly unhappy, I've probably done my job and you've probably reached the right outcome. So that's kind of, yeah, it's a lot of that, because people do, of course, people are really polarized and they come into that room thinking, I'm going to convince them. I don't know if you've ever tried to convince someone around to your way of thinking. It's really difficult to do. In fact, it actually, like psychology tells us, that it actually has the opposite effect often. And
The more you
it,
push, yes, absolutely.
so sometimes as well, I think that's why, and I don't care how you go to mediation, go with lawyers, without lawyers, whatever. But I do think there is some benefit in bringing a lawyer to mediation, because number one, it is getting people to see things in a different way, and me framing it in a different way to your ex, which is not coming from you, and it's not emotional, and it's not them thinking, oh, you're only saying that because you want this or you want more child support or whatever it might be. But also it's about option generation and me coming and saying, okay, like, we're at a bit of a stalemate here on this particular issue. Let's put it to one side. Have we thought about maybe doing it this way? Like, neither of you are really getting what you want, but it maybe is that some middle ground that we could explore. And people start to go, yeah, maybe we could do that. Like, that makes sense. So yeah, I think that's really big advantage of taking a lawyer. And as I think there are lawyers who their focus is more on mediation. If you can find someone who that's really what they believe in, I think that's really
Right.
important.
I suppose that too, if you're feeling financially trapped,
Mm.
or if you are in that situation, potentially not already divorced, but in that separating thinking stage,
Yes.
and you go, well, but I can't financially afford a lawyer. So mediation would actually be a very good place to start financially.
100%. And I also know, like, if you're in a situation where you can't afford a lawyer, which is super common and understandable, legal aid, or at least in WA, we have a really good dispute resolution program here, which is like a mediation style program. They will often give you a lawyer that you don't have to pay for. They'll provide the mediator, they'll provide the mediation space, and that's a really good thing for people to explore. I think I have a lot of clients who kind of choose to go down that path. There's also some sort of government subsidized mediation services, which a lot of them you can't bring a lawyer to, but as I said, it's better just to get there and try and suss out where you're both at. See if you can get anything in place at the start. Doesn't mean you have to go there with the intention that this is going to be the way it looks forever.
Yeah.
Sometimes it's, let's get a plan in place for the next 3 to 6 months, and then we can come back. Let's let the dust settle. You don't know where you're going to be living. I don't know if I'm going to be working. Like, all of these things which are really, like, you're in a really unstable period of your time of your life just after
Yes.
settling. And I think just knowing that the way we talk about it now might not necessarily be the way it's going to be forever. And
And
in some ways that's, take that pressure off yourself that you need to come up with that right now. Like, I think that's really, it's,
exactly, because you're at that point, you're just going, oh, this is the end of my life. This is the be and end all. And the decisions I make right now are going to be governing the rest of my life, and you just get, it doesn't have
exactly.
to be.
And that's so much pressure and so much overwhelm.
Yes.
Like, no, like, take that off your plate. No, don't have to do that.
Yeah. So thank you for that. I really appreciate that. Looking back at your work, what's the most important lesson you've learned about resilience and freedom from the incredible mums that that's a bit of a curvy one I've thrown at you.
Yeah, I think for me, it's that realization for a lot of mums. I would rarely see someone that isn't happier in the long run after things get sorted. I think there's a real, like I said, a real power in identifying, okay, this wasn't the right thing for me. I
Mm.
want to move on to the next stage of my life, helping people navigate that and then watching them come out the other side. And I've had clients who will come to me and they walk in and the first day and they are just broken. Like, they
Yeah.
are just, you can see they've been beaten down. There's probably been some elements of family violence. They're probably just really struggling just to look after their kids and do all the things there, while they've also got this other person who's really not helping them with anything, like mentally or emotionally, or just in the sense of helping in general. And seeing the change in people as they go through the process and come out the other side. I had this client once who came and she was just a mess when she first came to see me. And I always think about her, because by the time we got to the mediation and settled things, she looked like a totally different person. Like, I don't think if I'd seen her on the street the first time and the last time, I don't think I would have recognized her.
Right.
Like, she was just beautiful. She was just glowing. And I remember saying to her, like, this is incredible. Like, this transformation. She was like, this was the right decision for me, Ella. Like, this was absolutely, and sometimes you don't know how much better it can be until you're not in it anymore.
You
And
don't
I
know how
think,
much weight you're carrying until you put the sack
yeah,
down.
I think so. And I think that I love being part and seeing people through through that. Like I find that it's hard because you do get people who struggle so much with the process and struggle with the ongoing conflict and stuff, but people who I think who have that kind of happiness in coming out of things, you just see in them that they're probably going to have less conflict because they let things go. They're just like, oh well, he's a bit of a pain, like I'm just going to have to live with that in lots of ways. And they just sort of, because they're just doing them, they're just happy and they're just moving on. And I love that, like absolutely love that.
That's magical. That's absolutely beautiful to point that out. And I hear and I see some of the mums I know and potentially a little bit of myself in that. It's just you when that decision has been made and you finish, you work through the process is hard, but then at the end of it, you realize that your life hasn't ended. You're still alive. Yes, that aspect of your life has, but you are now free to embrace whoever it is that you are now and create a new future. And that can be so empowering. And you've freed yourself and you freed your other person too, because had you stayed together, potentially both of your lives would have not been exactly what you wanted and what you needed them to be. So, I think
there's something really beautiful about that, because people, when it happens, there's shock and there's trauma and there's often that grieving, not just the relationship, but grieving that sense of this is my family, this is what my life is going to be like, this is the life we're all going to have together.
A life that never happens and it won't happen. Yes.
Of course, and take that time to grieve it. Like I think that's so important. But I think for me, like in answer to your question, like for me, it's seeing the growth in particularly in women when they come through it, and you just realize, oh wow, like you're just flourishing under this. You take advice well. You want to get things sorted. You're motivated to be out of this. You're not there sort of still really enmeshed in your pain, thinking about all this. You're just like, no, I'm ready. I'm taking the next step. I'm moving on, and I absolutely love that.
Beautiful. And I think maybe on that note, we will finish because it's such a beautiful, it's just created an imagery in my head that's so cool.
Well, I got away with words, people tell me.
Are you sure? You're a lawyer. It comes with the territory.
Unfortunately.
But what I might do is I'll put a few links to your practice in the show notes. And also you mentioned the legal aid in WA. I might actually have a look through and put in the links nationally. So wherever the mums are listening or watching, they have a bit of a resource to go to if they're in the process of contemplating divorce or if they're already going through it and they need to have a bit more support and help.
Right. Yeah, I think that's a great idea. I think that like community legal centres, all of those types of resources are amazing for people to access as like even just as like a first port of call. So
bless. All right. Well, thank you so very much for your time today. I truly appreciate it.
No worries. Thanks so much for having me. It was lovely to chat. I feel like we've just been having a chat, so it's been lovely.
That's always the idea. It's about having a little chat. And also for those Beanstalk mums that read the website, there's a few blogs from Ella there as well that you can have a lovely cuppa and sit down and have a read of when you have that 2 minutes to yourself.
Which never happens when you've got young kids, so let's be honest.
That's why the articles are really, really short. So you can like literally skim read. Get the information on the go. All right. I look forward to chatting to you in the future and hopefully collaborating in any different ways. And again, thank you so very much for today. I appreciate it.
No problem. Anytime.